our operators, Megan Joyce and Megan Sahilialu, and of course my co-host, Dr. Lori Moore-Merrill. This is our final presentation of the 2020 Urban Fire Forum Live series, and I want to offer my sincere appreciation for their wonderful work throughout this series. It has been an absolute pleasure working with Lori and the Megs. Since we are recording today, I need to read a very brief statement as follows. Of course, I know all of you very well, but since this session will be recorded, for the record, I am Russ Sanders, the Executive Secretary of the Metropolitan Fire Chiefs Association. Welcome to the Urban Fire Forum Live. I'm recording this event on behalf of NFPA. This recording will become the property of NFPA and may be used by NFPA for any lawful purpose. By participating and or attending this event, you agree to be recorded and to allow NFPA to use such recording for any lawful purpose. If you do not wish to be recorded, please hang up and exit the meeting at this time. Also, all participants will be muted for the duration of the meeting. If you have a question or comment, please type it into the feature located on the control bar. All questions will be addressed at the completion of the presentation. Also, after today's presentation, Megan will be posting a recording of the session on the Urban Fire Forum website. Our topic today will be CDC, Public Safety PPE Opportunities Using Your Data, and our speaker will be Dr. Susan Moore, Senior Scientist at the National Personal Protective Technology Laboratory. My co-host, Lori Moore. Lori, would you like to add a few words about Dr. Moore?
I'd love to. Thanks, Russ, and hi, everybody. Thanks for hanging with us and joining us on this final Urban Fire Forum Live. So I hope you have, like Russ, we hope you've gotten some good information in very short time frames. So today is going to be no exception with Dr. Susan Moore. I've worked with Susan for several years, and she is incredibly passionate about firefighter PPE. Now, you may not be aware of the National Personal Protective Technology Laboratory inside NIOSH. We all know NIOSH, but we don't necessarily know all of the smaller groups within NIOSH that are working for the health and safety of firefighters. And Susan and her team are certainly one of those groups. So they have for many, many years been working to test and look at firefighter PPE, assure that it's safe, all of those different aspects that we have questions about. Susan and her team have tried to address and continue to do so. A lot of their work has been with manufacturers to make sure that they have the appropriate information as they are making the gear, right? Which is always very important. But today you're going to hear about some new opportunities, not only of what they are doing, but opportunities for you to participate in some of this research, your department to participate. Any questions you have about PPE in various segments, not just firefighting PPE, but also as we are in the COVID timeframe, right? So a lot of those questions can be addressed. And Susan and her team have been very agile to move to that arena immediately to start looking at firefighters and paramedic use with the COVID pandemic and the necessary PPE. So you're gonna get a lot of information today, again, in a bit of a lightning round. So be alert, be ready to ask your questions. Just wanted to get you in the frame of mind. So without further ado, let me introduce to you Dr. Susan Moore, who is going to be doing our presentation today. So Susan?
Thank you, Lori. Just to give you guys a little information about me specifically and where I sit in the organization. Lori mentioned NIOSH and NPPTL. Just, you know, from my larger NIOSH role, I'm actually the public safety sector co-coordinator. And I actually just recently moved to a new position, so I'm no longer the senior scientist, but I'm now the associate director for science within that National Personal Protective Technology Laboratory. That's one of the laboratories within NIOSH that focuses exclusively on PPE. Today what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an overview of 6 NIOSH projects. 5 of them are within NPPTL, and 1 of them is within one of the other divisions that also supports PPE-related work. I'm going to walk through all 6 of these. I'm going to give you an idea of what we're working on, where we are with that work, and also give you an idea of how we would love to work with you to help us move that work forward faster and to produce better quality output. After I'm done giving the overview, what we're going to do is we're going to break because I've invited all of the principal investigators for these 6 studies to join us today. And when I'm done giving the overview here, which will take about half of our time, we're going to invite them on, and you can have an open discussion forum with all of the experts leading these studies included as well. So I want to get started. I want to first talk about study number 1 on this list, firefighter exposure characteristics and PPE usage. This is a study that we're working on with the International Public Safety Data Institute, working with IPSCI, who is the company, the organization that administers the National Fire Operations Reporting System, or NFORS. We're working with them to leverage and expand NFORS specifically as a model for informing call characteristics and firefighter and PPE exposures. Now, what drew us to interest to the NFORS systems are the 2 forms of data that come into the system that have value for the types of work we do. But first, I want to talk here at the top, this blue text, looking at the computer-aided dispatch module that they have. Now, this is the module where for all of your municipalities, they're going to hook into your existing CAD systems and pull data out. It provides automated call-specific information. Gives us information about different incident types. We can look at call frequency, call duration, the number of apparatus being deployed, the number of responders that are being deployed on those apparatus. But it goes another step further. Not only do we get that CAD data, that automated data out of your CAD system, but there's also an opportunity to link that data. For every call that's being pushed through that CAD data, there's the opportunity for your firefighters to log on a voluntary basis. They can manually log their individual exposure experience for each of those calls. Now, this is important because we know that you might go on a fire call, but not everyone responding to that call is exposed to the same things or for the same duration of time. So it becomes really important that we understand the unique exposure experience of each firefighter for these different calls. So by having the incident number allow us to link both the CAD data with this individual exposure data, we can look at not just the incident type, call frequency, call duration. We can now dig a level deeper, and we can go into the exposures of the firefighters and look at each of those incident types and think about things like, well, how frequently are they being exposed to certain things? What's the duration of those different exposures? What's the variability in those durations? How frequently are they using certain types of PPE? Right now, a big question is, what's the frequency of being reusing disposable PPE? We can also look at stuff like post-call PPE care, looking at if gear had to be sent out for repair or laundering. All of this gives us a really good information, not just about what's happening in your department for call volume and demand, not just about what the firefighters are being asked and being exposed to, but also through that link, we get a lot of information about what your PPE is being exposed to. And that's where we, in this talk, want to focus. We're talking about the PPE that, as an intervention view of what we're doing to help improve that. So a key step here, not only can we link these 2 pieces of data, but if I call your attention to this figure on the right, this is just a map of the current distribution of the fire departments currently participating in the NFORS system. And that means that for each of these departments, there's the opportunity to access all this CAD data, and there's the opportunity for any firefighters willing on a voluntary basis to provide exposure data to get that information, start informing our research and the design and execution of that research. So how do we do that? I mean, I just showed you a bunch of fire departments spread across the country, and they all have different firefighters. There'll be thousands of firefighters involved in this. Well, what we're working to do as we explore this model is we're looking to develop an application programming interface, or you may just hear people call it API. And what that just basically means is we're looking for a way to take the data that's in the NFORS system and map it over to us so that we can look across all of those departments and all of those firefighters and start looking for trends and start doing some statistics on what we're seeing across the board, looking for, differences in regions, differences in size of municipalities and those types of things. Of course, all within the confines of the agreed upon data use agreement that all these fire departments have with IPSCI to start with. But what does it mean we can do? Well, what we're looking to be doing is start characterizing the calls related to preparedness and response. How often people are going, when is it spiking, how many times they might have potential exposures, for example, to an infectious disease. These are all really important things. In fact, they're important right now. But it gives us the opportunity to look at those things and inform guidelines and understand the demand on your departments, but also the PPE demand. The other thing that we have the opportunity to do with this data is it really lets us obtain article-specific exposure histories for multi-use PPE. Think about your turnout gear, coat, trousers, gloves, and so on. These multi-use items, every firefighter's piece sets of gear go through different exposures than somebody else's. And then if you compare one department to another, it's night and day. And so what this allows us to do, because each individual firefighter in the system will have gear linked to them, it allows us to also, by getting firefighter exposure history, it allows us to get gear exposure history as well. With this information, we can start informing standards development, informing test method development, and it helps support life cycle studies by enabling our researchers to look in the system and identify specific articles of PPE that have an exposure history that'll support the needs of our study. That lets us do a better job of understanding what your gear is doing, how it's performing, and helps us design studies to make recommendations to improve that gear. This sort of approach that we're talking about here is, that we're exploring, the response rate of the individual firefighters is critical to the long-term success of the effort. As I noted in my early slides, the CAD data is automated. The firefighter data is voluntary and manually entered. It provides them a career diary, though, all of their individual exposures. And there's a lot of value to that, not just in helping our research, but also in helping them understand, how often they were exposed to an infectious disease, how long their exposures were for that infectious disease, how many fire calls were they exposed to, how long were they exposed to them. All of that data becomes really important for someone to have for their career as a diary. So we believe that there's a great value proposition for a firefighter to want to engage in exposure tracking. Whether it's with the NFORS system or a different exposure tracking app, the value of tracking your exposures as a firefighter is really quite high. So one of the things we want to do to help support this study and to help people realize that value is develop a toolkit where the components of these toolkits would be adaptable for use by any fire department and would help promote firefighter engagement in the exposure tracking. So as an example of some of the components we might put in a toolkit like that, maybe we would already craft a draft email that could come from your department chief or your union leader, flyers that describe this value to the firefighter, or flyers that even make it really simple for how you sign up for and download the NFORS app and get started. Also key pieces, the fire departments will get the best value out of this, and we too will receive the best value from a research perspective if they go through steps like linking their personnel system to NFORS so that NFORS automatically tracks exactly what staff members are assigned to what apparatus and go to get a point on what call. It also lets you preload in your employee profiles what serial numbers for gear are assigned to specific employees. That means when they go to fill this out, it automatically populates, hey, you were sent on run number this, and what gear did you take? You can auto-select from a pre-populated list. All of that reduces the burden on them, increases the quality of the data, and the likelihood they'll actually provide the data. So these are some of the things that we want to put into that toolkit. But at the end of the day, we don't do your job. We don't know what it's like to be living in your shoes, and we need to work with all of the stakeholders, the fire departments and their unions, IPSCI, IAFF, IAFC, and so on. We need to work with all of you to really understand what components need to go in that toolkit, what kind of messaging needs to go in that toolkit, and how can we best work with you to support this message beyond just the fire departments that are administering and implementing this tool. How can everybody else play a role to help get the firefighters engaged and encouraged to participate? So for this project, we have two needs right now. One, we're looking for fire departments that are willing to work directly with us as we develop and deploy this toolkit in the early stages. And in exchange for helping us do that, we have vouchers to the NFORS system that'll help get you your first year of subscription and your first connection fee. So there's an exchange opportunity for you helping us and us providing you some resources. The second thing we're looking for are stakeholders who'd be willing to help us and are interested in working to increase response rate broadly. So that's for this project. Now, I want to transition to talk about the second project on this list, which is a great project to build on to this first one because it's specifically about evidence to inform turnout gear life cycle. Now, in this project, I want to just make sure everyone understands that research has shown that the existing 10-year turnout gear retirement criteria doesn't actually seem to align with what the performance of the gear is throughout its life cycle. So on this slide, what I'm showing you is just a snapshot of data from Aquari et al. In 2015. They had some gear that was donated that was under the retirement age and some gear donated that was over the retirement age. And what's interesting in each category is when they were tested and evaluated, if you're under 10 years, everything should be passing. So we're in this column, I'm interested in what failed. And here, if it's over 10 years, in theory, if the criteria aligned with the performance of the gear, you shouldn't see anything really passing a lot. So when we take a look at TPP, total heat loss, steam strength, and so on, what sticks out are some, in this column, the things that failed too early, and in this column, the things that were passing despite being beyond the age. It tells us that we need to do more and provide evidence to help inform the specific requirements of these standards. That data doesn't exist today. So what NIOSH is doing is we're working to provide evidence-based recommendations to improve the existing performance care and maintenance standards, and also to improve your user confidence that this gear is going to protect you as planned. But one of the things we've done as a part of this project is we have pulled together a very large partnership. And on this slide right now, you can see all the different members of that partnership. We had to do a little delay of having a second meeting of the partnership because of the COVID response support we have. But we're looking to reconvene that partnership in the not too distant future. And if you're really interested in being a part of this study, please contact us. You'll see the contact information at the end. We'd love to have you be a part of the partnership. You can see all of your colleagues up here who are participating already. So what's going on in this study specifically? Well, first thing is we're taking 4 types of data. We're collecting it from 4 different departments, and totally we'll be collecting 400 coats and 400 trousers. So the 4 types of data we're collecting starts with, again, getting that exposure history data for the gear. We're using NFORS to do that. We're taking a couple months, 6 months, we're hoping, of data of exposure, extrapolating that out to give us estimates for what that gear was exposed to throughout its life. Next thing we're doing is when we sample that gear from the department, we're conducting an advanced visual inspection of every article that we receive. And then the next step is to actually conduct the performance test to the NFPA standard using the coat and the trousers that we obtain, testing and evaluating them while knowing or having estimates for what their exposure history was. Now, this performance test step is actually quite complicated, and that's why our researchers need to get engaged. Right now, your gear, it gets certified using rolls of fabric. It doesn't get certified using the actual garment itself. And the challenge here is when we want to pull garments from the field and test and evaluate them, the challenge is that the sizes of the swatches and the number of swatches that are required in the standard are too many for us to get all this from one set of gear. So the first thing we're doing as a research organization is we're figuring out what size swatches and how many and what tests are most important for us to include when we do this evaluation of your existing gear. That's a critical step here. And once we achieve that, now this method, this test method that we've developed can be used in many ways. For example, manufacturers can use it to make their gear better. Fire departments could use it to send their gear out to be tested to verify that it's still performing. But until we develop this method, those types of opportunities don't exist. We need to complete this method. That's the third piece of data, is the performance test data. Again, TPP, THL, steam strength, those types of data. And the final step is we want to take a look at the concentration of organic compounds that's embedded within the fibers of the gear to give us an idea of what is staying in that gear and what role that those concentration of those organics might have, not just in gear performance, but in potential exposure. So where are we with this project? Well, first I'll start at the top. We've got 2 fire departments that have committed to working with us. For the advanced visual inspection, we have already established with great stakeholder feedback methods that include quantitative and semi-quantitative measurements. The method includes obtaining photographic evidence from every single article we collect and every piece of data we collect off the garment. And right now, because it's a lot of data to input, it takes a long time to just do this inspection the way we've adapted it. We're developing an application that would allow you, using any smart device, tablet, phone, whatever, to systematically enter the data, take quick pictures, write it down, and do a very quick inspection that's way more detailed than anything we're doing right now. And this will optimize data entry, and our plan is to ultimately deliver that to the fire service community for other folks to use this same application that we're using. So it'll give us a very detailed, very robust data from a visual inspection standpoint. As far as the performance tests go, we needed to make sure that our laboratory correlated with laboratories that are doing certification testing. So we've completed that. Our equipment and our staff are performing these test methods exactly as the certification groups are. The next thing is we need to do preliminary tests to look at the size of the swatches, the quantity of the swatches that were necessary for us to obtain really what is 7-8 pieces of data off of a single garment, okay? So we've been doing that, we've completed those tests, and what we've done now is we've drafted an initial work instruction that basically says, here's the size of the swatch, here's the number of swatches, here's the region of the garment we recommend you look to take it from, considering all sorts of accessory pockets and different things that you might have lettering on your particular garment. So we have a full draft established. At the next partnership meeting, we're going to present this entire work procedure for people to review. Finally, for the fourth piece of data, we have a chemical analysis plan. We spent many discussions with several members of the partnership really talking about this. It's a very challenging test plan to develop. We've got one developed, and we're now pilot testing it to verify the adequacy of that method before we initiate and go out and actually collect gear. So we've had a lot of great movement on this project, slightly delayed just because of the COVID response support we've had to provide. What do we need for the project? Well, we're looking for 2 more fire departments that are willing to participate. In exchange for participation, obviously we're sampling 100 coats and 100 trousers from each participating fire department. We have vouchers for gear. So we have $2,000 for every coat and trouser we take. So if you're willing to work with us, you get a voucher, you buy a brand new set to replace the set we take. We also have NFORS vouchers that would give you the initial hookup and also a 6-month subscription if you participate with us in that study. Our preference is for these 2 departments looking for a Northwestern and Southwestern fire department. Honestly, we're looking for some gear that's been exposed to some WUI type environments and also some high UV light. That's why we're looking for those 2 areas. All right, want to go on now to our third study, which is about optimizing SCBA weight. So the objective of this study is we want to inform regulations, standards, and guidance that to give input about what is a safe weight for an SCBA that has the accessories that firefighters need to have on it. And our hope is that with the data we collect through this study, that we can help provide recommendations that will ultimately improve balance, improve comfort, and potentially even reduce cardiovascular disease. So when we talk about trying to make recommendations for an ideal SCBA weight, when you think of all the accessories as well, how do we get there? Well, we actually have numerous input of data we're going to collect and look at systematically. The first piece of data is what we call 3D static modeling. Take a look at this image. You see what is a static model of a human being, where we can put that human being in various positions to simulate activities you might do, like a dummy drag or something like that. We can ladder climb. We can simulate those things with this static model, and we can get information about how much weight and force and compression is coming into your spine and other parts of your body to help us understand what might be a safe maximum weight for the SCBA. But that's not enough to really make a recommendation. We need to take another step. We need to look at 3D biomechanical modeling. Now, 3D modeling is actually quite interesting because I don't know if I've just activated the animation. If you see all the little balls here on the figure, I'm sure you've all seen those commercials where for some high-end video game, they've got a football player with a black spandex suit and these silver balls all over his body. And then you see the video game and it looks so lifelike you can't even imagine it, even them spiking the football and doing their touchdown dance. That's the same technology that we're using in our laboratory. It's that accurate, it's that precise, it offers that much value in reproducing human motion. So what we're looking to do is have firefighters come in, wear the SCBA with the accessories, and replicate certain key functions and activities you do. Let us measure what's happening in your body, and then take this dynamic model and start looking at safe weights on your body as well. So beyond the modeling, though, We also want to look at things like asking you questions about wearability, you know, really understanding what the challenges are when it comes to wearing this particular apparatus. We want to look at your postural stability. We want to look at what happens when you're putting yourself in these different positions to do different jobs, and you've got all this weight distributed on you. At what point do you start having indicators to us that there's a balance problem that could lead to an injury potentially? We're also interested in having people simulate certain activities so that we can look at physiological burden, looking at your oxygen volume, heart rate, and breathing rate while you're doing these types of tasks. And finally, we're interested in your comfort. We want to ask questions about the comfort you're experiencing or not experiencing and let you give us information about that. And the idea is collectively, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different pieces of data that we will look at in combination to ultimately make these recommended guidance information that will inform regulation standards and other types of guidance. So that's the goal, but where are we right now? Well, right now we've completed this part of the study, the static modeling, okay? What we need to do, we're getting permission and approval right now to do human subject testing where we would have firefighters come in and perform tasks for us while we collect the data from them. And so you can see here, this is just the data from the static modeling, having people do, you can see the exact actions and activities we're having the model do that we would want to replicate when we have human subjects. We get information about max weight. Again, this is just one piece of data. It's not the final piece. So what do we need? Well, for this project, we need stakeholders to help recommend to us firefighter tasks that we need to evaluate. Look along this x-axis. That's what we're doing right now. If you see something missing that you think is vital to this kind of a study, we need you to reach out to us and let us know. So that's the first thing we need. Second thing is, once we get our approval, we're going to be looking for firefighters who are willing to complete the wearability questionnaire. If you could help us notify firefighters of this opportunity and get them engaged, we would really appreciate that support. And finally, when we get back into the lab and we have approval, we're going to look for firefighters willing to participate as subjects in our study. We're located in the Pittsburgh area for this particular piece of data collection, so people in and around that region would be really helpful to us if they would volunteer and participate to be subjects in that kind of study. Next on our list, chemical contamination of wildland firefighting gear. So for this particular study, what we're going to do is we're going to conduct a laundry study to inform gear care for a new wildland standard. So take a look here, you can see a typical soiled wildland shirt. Now, washing a wildland shirt is a little challenging when you're in such a remote location. Typically, what people have been using is either household washer or a laundromat. So as a first thing we want to do is we want to take a look at, you can see here the picture on our right is our lab. You can see we have a household washer in here. We also have a commercial extractor. The first part of what we're doing, we're comparing the performance of the household washer versus the commercial extractor for removing contaminants. We're looking at the effect of temperature on the performance. And specifically, we're taking field soiled gear and we're pulling the contaminants out and we're evaluating them to determine what's actually on that gear. Like what is being deposited on the gear from being in the wildland environment. For these 3 steps of the process, we're in our data analysis phase. So we've conducted all the studies, we're just now analyzing and interpreting the data. But we still have work to do here. We also need to develop a passive cleaning system that can actually be used in the field. So we have to, now that we know what's on the gear, we know how effective commercial and household equipment is, we have an idea of what we need to design and get out there that's field deployable in a wildland environment to clean this gear. So what do we need from all of you? We would love to have fire departments or individual firefighters send us soiled shirts and pants, specifically wildland shirts and pants. Now, while our supplies last, in exchange, we can get you a new shirt or pants, again, while our supplies last. So there's an opportunity to get new stuff by sharing with us some of your soiled gear for our study. Next on the list, I want to talk about evaluating structural firefighter textiles for PFAS. Now, PFAS is a hot topic right now. And for those of you that don't know, some PFAS compounds are being used to construct your turnout gear. And we don't at this time know if there's any potential for deleterious health effects because of that. And you might say, well, why are they using PFAS in the first place? I'll draw your attention to this picture on the lower left. This is a cutout of a structural firefighter garment. You can see the textile here is coated with a durable water repellent that contains short-chain PFAS compounds. And you can see just how effective that particular compound is at its job of being a water repellent. So that's why they're being used. But what we don't know yet is the potential effect on your health. So what we're doing is our folks are getting in the lab, as you can see, our laboratorian right here in these pictures, getting in the lab for the purpose of identifying and quantifying the PFAS compounds that are in current and former textiles that could potentially pose a risk to you. We're using traditional and accepted laboratory methods to extract the PFAS from the garment. And right now where we are, I mean, this study just began October 1. So right now we're collecting background information and doing a literature search to fully inform our methods before we actually start collecting the data. So what do we need from all of you? We'd love to have fire departments come in and donate some gear manufactured between 2010 and 2014. If you've got gear that you can donate to us for that, we'd really appreciate it, really help us with this PFAS work. So the last study I want to talk about here is turnout gear performance after repeated laundering. Now, this is a study that's a collaborative effort with the Illinois Fire Service Institute and Underwriters Laboratory. Now, essentially what we're doing in this is we're taking multiple turnout gear and hood types. As a first step, what we're doing is we're taking mannequins, like you can see in this picture here, we're dressing them in the gear, and then we're exposing them to fire and smoke, and up to 40 times we're doing that with a subsequent laundering or decontamination. So you might say, well, how did you decide on the parameters for which you were going to expose them to? Well, part of what we did is we took samples on firefighters prior to doing this study, where we looked at what was the air, what was the contaminants in the air outside of the PPE, under the PPE, meaning what broke through their PPE and got inside, what was on the outside surface of the PPE, and also what was on the inside surface of the PPE. So it broke through the PPE and then deposited on the inside surface. We collected that information to inform the study design that we did here. Now, as a second step in this study, we also had firefighters wear new gear and gear that had been exposed and laundered up to 40 times during training fires. So what that meant is we took measurements on those firefighters, and we looked at the contaminants that had broke through that gear, the contaminant uptake in the body. We took measurements of things from the biological aspects of the human being to say, what actually did your body take in when it was exposed? We also looked at firefighters' physiological response, their heart rate, their core temp, their skin temp. We then took measurements on the gear, looking at the new gear, but then also after 10, 20, and 40 cycles of the exposure launder. Okay, and we looked at THL, TPP, seam strength, tear strength, liquid penetration, and viral penetration. So where are we right now with this work? Well, we've got 2 publications out right now. You can see the titles right here for both publications. We are in the middle of analyzing that collection of all that data. What we're really asking you for is you to please help us disseminate and share the initial findings of this work. See these 2 papers, go out, read them, share them with your colleagues, start talking about what we're learning from these studies. So I've now completed going over all 6 studies that we wanted to talk about today. On this slide, I just want to kind of orient you to this. We're about to go into the panel discussion where we answer your questions. All 6, you can see the title here. Quick little reminder of what we're looking for, hoping to work with all of you for that study, and who the point of contact is. This is the principal investigator, and who the best person to talk to about it would be. You can see we have this information for all 6 studies. So before we go to that panel discussion, I just want to say, you know, the truth is it's quality partnerships that allow us to enhance worker safety and health. And the fire service has been wonderful partners with us through our journey as NIOSH. We appreciate all that you've done, all that you contribute to this. And we work to help bring everybody home every day, safe, happy, and healthy. And we thank you for your participation in that side of the partnership, and we look to always meet your expectations on our side of that partnership. So with that, I'll turn it back to our previous slide and ask the PIs for each of these studies to be ready to join us for the discussion. And I'm not sure if Russ or Lori, you'll be our moderator, or maybe it'll be you, Megan, but I'd like to turn it over to all of you to help us ask some of the questions.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. That was absolutely fantastic. I follow this fairly closely, I thought, and there's tons of information you just shared that I have never heard about. So thank you so much. That was great. The questions I've received so far, the first is the fundamental characteristic of our turnout gear. The TPP of 35 dates back to Project Fires, which is 40 plus years ago. That included assumptions on a thermal exposure of 50% radiant and 50% convective energy. Are there any efforts to re-examine those fundamental assumptions? Also, is there any consideration of the need for different types of PPE for different fireground and emergency activities, as in why wear PPE designed for interior fire attack when conducting other types of activities? I know you touched on some of that, but that was the question we received early on.
Okay, sure. And, I think if I remember correctly, the first part of your question really focused more on exposure assessment and understanding what the actual exposures were and how well the standards captured and replicated that sort of exposure scenario. So I think the first part of the question is about what is NIOSH maybe actively doing, or what have we recently done in the area of exposure assessment? And I know my colleague Kenny Fentz has worked in that area quite extensively. So in a second, I'll turn it over to him to provide some input there. The second part of the question was really about how appropriate it is to use certain types of PPE for certain tasks, is really what it sounded more like, for certain types of calls. So I'll provide an initial response there, and then we can maybe go back to Kenny. I think the work that Emily's doing, and I can let her elaborate on how this work will help. I think that work where we get a lot more information about call-specific characteristics, the duration of exposure, and the nature of those exposures. If we can get that, we can start asking ourselves the question using sound data about what types of exposures are really happening, and we could say, where do we need to go in and do some different types of exposure assessment studies? And then from there, we can say, how might we need to change recommendations around the type of PPE that should be worn, or the standards around that PPE for different types of tasks? I think a first key step is, do we really understand the nature, frequency, and duration and type of exposures that are being experienced for all these different types of call scenarios? I don't think we have adequate understanding of that yet. And I think that first study that Emily's working on will help us with that. So Emily, is there anything you want to add about what you're seeing and what your early working with this data is? I mean, this study just got off the ground a few weeks ago. Anything early, Emily, you want to share about this? And then we'll go to Kenny to talk about exposure assessment.
Thanks, Susan. We just started looking at the data, and we just started receiving PPE exposure data. And because the response rates we have so far are a little bit lower in terms of exposures to specific chemicals or biological contaminants, we don't have high enough frequencies yet to be able to share specific results, but everything that you listed are definitely things that we hope to be able to address, especially if we're able to get stakeholders from really across the country, so we can really look at how a lot of different factors are influencing some of those exposures.
Great, thank you, Emily. Kenny, would you like to talk a little bit about exposure assessment?
Sure. So, one of the things that we're doing right now is really trying to characterize the performance of turnout gear and providing that chemical protection, during realistic fire scenarios. So the last study that Susan mentioned, we had fuel packages. Really, it was a fuel package that included a sofa. So there's, it's more realistic smoke exposure than what you might encounter during, say, a typical training fire. And, it's important to look at that because of all the different combustion byproducts that are produced when you burn something with synthetic materials. And so we're looking at what is the breakthrough through the turnout gear of those different chemicals, but also, and maybe even more importantly, what is the absorption of those compounds into the body. And so biological monitoring has been really a critical component of that research, because, you know, breakthrough is important, and, you know, obviously determines what might get onto the skin, but what really matters is what gets into the body. And so that's a critical component of what we're doing. And then what happens to the turnout gear as it's continuously exposed and laundered. So those are, you know, important questions that we're trying to answer in that research.
Yeah, and I think just to help connect everything together, when it comes to really fully addressing the question at hand, you know, Kenny's talking about what's actually getting into the body. And I don't know that Matt Dooling is able to join us yet today. He was traveling in a no-cell reception zone. But this project here, where he's the principal investigator, where we're actually testing and evaluating all that turnout gear with estimates of its exposure history, you start being able to match, okay, what's getting into the body, with what kinds of exposures are we seeing the performance of the gear change, right? So we start seeing degradation and performance of the gear, and we start understanding what's getting into the body. It takes us one very, very important step closer to saying, where is the breakdown in that, where is the breakdown that's not keeping the firefighter safe? You know, what are the issues that need to be addressed in those standards, and go back and look at those pieces. So in the study that Matt's doing, you'll notice TPP, THL, viral penetration, and many other steam breaking strength, many other factors are included in that study. When I talked about Kenny's study number 6 here, a number of those same tests were being included. One of the big helps that's going to come from Matt Dooling's study is actually we'll be able to get many, many more of the NFPA test methods accounted for off of a single coat and a single pair of trousers. So the amount of data on PPE, the trouser and coat performance, will be significantly higher than what we've seen in some of our other studies. And that's because Matt's going to be working to develop that test method that lets us take all of those swatches off of a single garment. But the two in parallel are really going to help us address the question you're talking about. And then Emily's study that's going to help us get access to more gear and more exposure history only blows that door wide open for us to be able to start doing really focused studies that get right at the heart of what you're asking. So thank you for the question. It was a great question.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. The next question relates to NFPA 1851. The question is, the 10-year retirement cycle has become a mandatory requirement in the NFPA standards. That figure is probably too long for a busy fire department that uses gear heavily, but it is very restrictive and very costly for many small fire departments that fight very few fires. Is there any effort to look at better criteria for retirement and different requirements for different types of gear, such as coats versus helmets? And I just add to that, Susan, Dr. Moore and I had a chance to talk along with Dr. Lori Moore-Merrill before the event started today. And this is something the Metro chiefs have been involved with for some time now, working with Sally Heyman, who's a Miami-Dade County Commissioner. So we are very active in this concern as well, and we're hoping to find a solution. I think Dave Downey is also on the phone. I don't know if he's able to call, and he's traveling, but he's been very involved in this as well. So Dave, if you have any comments, please feel free to add them as well. Dr. Moore?
Yeah, sure. I was just looking at the call to see if I saw Matt Dooling joining us. I don't see him on it, but I can answer this question. I'm actually the co-PI on study 2 here that's on the board. And, you know, what you're getting at, that's the heart of this study. When we're taking these coats and trousers, so right now we're looking to work with 4 departments. We're looking to have them geographically dispersed. We're looking intentionally because we want different types of UV exposure. We want different types of building materials burning type of exposure. You know, we want, as I mentioned, we want to make sure we're getting a department that has some WUI type exposures for the gear as well. We're looking for those types of departments to work with as a first step here. When we collect from each department 100 coats and 100 trousers, what we're doing as far as the sampling goes, we're sampling things that are have fewer exposures. So we're going to take that NFORS data, and we're going to, for 6 months, we'll get that data. We will extrapolate that data and make estimates for the exposures that particular article of PPE had for its entire life cycle. So we will then put each set of PPE that in the collaborating fire department, we'll put them in a category based on the number of fire incident exposures it's been exposed to. Okay, we will categorize them in one of 4 categories. So obviously the first category is going to be things that have only had a few exposures, and the 4th category will be things that have had a lot of fire exposures. And by doing it that way, we're going to sample this gear, and we're going to start looking at what happens for all of those test methods that we're going to be able to test off of the work instruction that Matt Dooling's developing. We're going to be able to say, how is your gear degrading as a function of its exposures, not as a function of time, as a function of its exposures. So if that particular article had been exposed to X number of fire-related calls, and that firefighter filled out the duration that they were exposed to those flames, we get a lot of information that allows us to kind of assess the fire exposure that article went to. And now we can link that to the types of degradation and performance we're seeing. That is the first most critical step to going from age-based to performance-based. Now, look, there's probably 800 configurations between the 3 layers of your turnout gear and all of the different textiles that go into it. And working with 4 departments that use 4 different manufacturers' gear is not something that can be fully and totally generalized. It will be an important and essential step forward to starting to look at where do we see gear performance suddenly and rapidly start to degrade? At how many exposures to flame and fire does this start to happen? We will get an idea of whether that's consistent across all the different types of gear that are part of that study, or whether it's really different depending on the manufacturer's product you're using or the underlying fibers that are part of that product. This will be an important step for us to make decisions on how to go forward with what to do with the standard. We'll be able to determine, do we have enough data to start working on language changes to that with the NFPA, giving them our research and letting them decide what to do with it? Or will they come back to us and say, this is great. As a next step, we need you to do this. And then we'll take that next step. That's where Emily's project, this one up here, becomes so critical, because by working and getting more firefighters to provide their exposures and linking the gear that they're using on these exposures, it opens the door for us to do very focused sampling of your gear. Instead of what Matt's doing, where he's taking 6 months of data and extrapolating to estimate over the life cycle, if we can get people consistently participating in the firefighter exposure piece, we will start to be able to track a piece of gear, a coat, a trouser, helmet, and start tracking what its specific exposure are over its life and sample it, test and evaluate it, and really get even more rigorous with what performance you have in your gear versus what its exposures were. That's the data we need to take to transition the standard the way you're asking for. And we are at the beginning of that hill. We've made a huge step up it, and we just need the firefighters to help us by providing this data so we can keep going. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely excellent response, Dr. Moore. I can't tell you how happy I am to hear that, because this is really a big and important issue for the Metro chiefs, and this is something we've been concerned about for some time. I wish now, after hearing your presentation, I would have invited Commissioner Heyman to join us, but we will be recording this, and I know Dave Downey is listening in, her chief, so we'll make sure she gets that information, because I know she's very interested in it as well. The last question I have is for Emily Haas. Is there a deadline for enrollment into your study, number one? And I should mention this is from Chief John Lane, who is president of the Metro, and the chief in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So I don't know if it makes any difference in the study if they're from the US or not, but the question is there a deadline for enrollment into your study, number one?
We don't have a specific deadline yet. We have 8 vouchers. So as we receive inquiries from fire departments who are interested, and then we assess kind of how they meet some of our standards for the study that Susan outlined, then we'll be making decisions. So anyone who's interested can definitely contact us.
And, I'd like to piggyback on that. For enrollment, that's, if you're interested in working with us to develop it, to get the vouchers. But to be clear, any fire department at any time can choose to participate in the NFORS system, and their data, because we're developing that API, that application programming interface. If you participate with NFORS, that data will come to us. if you participate and your firefighters are filling that out, it will come to us to do these evaluations. So yes, there's a great opportunity to participate and get the voucher piece of this to help offset the cost of participation with NFORS. But if you're already moving in that direction as a department and you want to try this particular mechanism, NFORS, out, do know that we will get that data, whether you're part of this study or not. And I think that's important because every participating fire department then is going to be contributing to the collective good of what we're trying to accomplish through this research.
Thank you both so much. That was our last question, but before I close it out, I would like to ask my co-host, Dr. Lori Moore Merrill, if she would like have any closing comments, please.
Thanks, Russ. And I just want to thank Susan and the whole team there for this presentation, because as you said, Russ, this highlights all of the work that's being done that most fire departments and certainly most fire chiefs have no idea it's going on. And unfortunately, that's often our communications breakdown between research and practice. And this is something that I think the Metro chiefs have really stepped up, particularly you, Russ, to understand that we have got to translate research into practice and vice versa. We need the chiefs to weigh in on what they need to know, just like the 10-year standard, right? That's something that was an issue that came to the table, and now it is actively being researched. And so we need that to continue. This kind of dialogue back and forth is very important, and the Metro really sets the stage for that because, as I've said many times, and Russ, you know well, everything trickles down from this group of chiefs, and they're rock stars, and we need them to weigh in. So I'm really anxious to hear more from the chiefs, their thoughts about this research, and really anxious to hear how many of them are ready, obviously, to get involved. So we're ready to help with that, be the conduit, and continue this research to practice dialogue. So thank you very much, Susan and the team.
Thank you, Lori. As we're looking to close this out, there was a lot of questions about turnout gear here, it's obvious, and other types of multi-use gear, and the concern about needing to have performance-based retirement. I also just want to remind folks, studies 4 and 5 on this list, we really, really need some engagement from the firefighting community to help get us access to gear, either structural firefighting gear manufacturers from 2010 to 2014, or wildland shirts and pants that have been soiled. Obviously, the wildland issue everybody is becoming very aware of. We need to make sure we're protecting those firefighters in those environments. We have an opportunity to inform a standard with high quality data. Right now you're talking about the gaps we still need to fill with the structural, but there's this opportunity right now with the wildland gear. If you yourself aren't involved in those or not involved in interacting with those departments, if you know people who are, we really could use that to make sure it's the best quality standard right from the beginning. And as far as study 5 on this list goes, we have obviously a pandemic right now, and there's been a big shift. But right before that pandemic, one of the hottest issues in the structural fire service community was this concern about PFAS. And there was a lot of draft legislation floating around and interest in this space. And yes, we have a pandemic. We can't lose sight of the importance of that issue as well. We have a robust study, great PI leading that work. It is equally important to understand the materials that are being used and making sure they're not just protecting you from the immediate hazard, but also not causing any other long-term health effects. You've got gear manufactured from 2010 to 2014. Maybe you're looking to retire it anyway because you've done a visual inspection. Please consider reaching out to Crystal. We really could use that gear to help with that issue as well. And again, the study 3 here, you've got ideas about the types of positions we need to, tasks we need to simulate to really inform safe weight for your SCBAs with all those accessories. We need your help there too. So I know the attention on the questions with a few of those other places. We do need your support there as well.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Again, I can't say how much I appreciate this presentation today. It's just been packed full of very important information. I'm so happy we have recorded it because I'm going to make sure I get out to every single Metro chief that was unable to participate today, so they'll tune in and listen to it because this is information they really need to hear. And again, I want my sincere thanks to all of you who have participated, who have submitted questions. Of course, my co-host, Dr. Lori Moore Merrill, fantastic. and our Megs that have done so much to make this successful. Can't tell you how much I appreciate all of it. And I'll be coming out with a survey in the next week or so, just to get your feedback on how we can do this better in the future, what we should build on, what we should kind of take away. So again, thank you to everyone, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.